There's always some level of stylization in my portraits or character illustrations, and I'm rarely aiming for realism. But today I want to go through the process of that stylization. How we can dial it up or down, and some key features that make the biggest impact for me. And all of that in a variety of mixed media as I fill a double-page spread in a new sketchbook with K-pop Demon Hunters fan art. So, as an artist living in South Korea, of course that movie immediately caught my eye. I ended up really liking not only the art, but the story and music as well. Thank you to Arrtx for sending me this sketchbook to try out and get some fan art out of my system. For my first sketch here, I picked our main character Rumi, who was the standout of the movie for me with very relatable flaws and vulnerability. I'm blocking in a very rough proportion sketch with a pencil. Usually I would never skip the first couple pages in a sketchbook like this. Filling the very first page is half the fun after all, but the design of this sketchbook is quite unique. To make the pages of each double spread lie flat, you can see that the binding here doesn't attach to the hardcover book spine, but is exposed. It really works, but just not for that very first spread, as that first page's textile binding makes it a bit more wobbly. I'll save that for color swatches and material tests later. This is a mixed media sketchbook with an A5 format, so 6 by 8 inches for the paper. As there's empty space underneath this left side of the spread, due to how the binding of the sketchbook works, I put a second, smaller sketchbook underneath. That might be inconvenient when travel sketching, so if you want to take advantage of this flat lay sketchbook style, it's more appropriate for using at home. The sketchbook comes with a little pocket to store loose paper snippets in, and the hardcover overall would make sense as a sturdy travel sketchbook, but then there's the bookbinding design that invites slower, well-set-up sketching sessions at home. So depending on what you're looking for, this could either be a versatile all-rounder sketchbook or one with a bit of a case of split personality. Personally, I don't see myself using this as a travel sketchbook, as the high page count with 120 pages to fill and hardcover make it a bit too heavy to carry along with me. The smaller A6 version might be a better fit for sketching on the go. I'd already given the smaller A6 version of this sketchbook a try with a quick portrait study, so I knew what art medium I wanted to focus on: colored pencils. The paper feels very pleasant to shade on, colors layered beautifully, and I wanted to see how it would hold up when adding in other art materials like markers and watercolors. Inspired by Rumi's hair color, I picked a violet shade for the line drawing. As references, I'm looking at screenshots from the movie, concept art posted by the amazing artists behind it, as well as some pictures of her voice actress to ground the portrait just a bit more in reality. This is, after all, about different approaches and levels of stylization. You can already see that I'm not trying to emulate the art style of the animation itself. I'm keeping the eyes closer to the size I'd draw them usually, just slightly exaggerating their simplicity with sharper lines and edges. If you're ever unsure how to approach a stylized portrait or any other subject, you can always start by keeping the proportions close to realism, but instead exaggerate the line work. Sharper angles, straight lines instead of curves, clarity where reality is soft and blurred. Eyes are often a key when it comes to stylization of portraits. Them being larger or more expressive, as they are in the movie or in manhwa, changes the impression of a drawing completely. But it's also something that can throw off the balance of a face very easily. One trick I like to keep in mind when exaggerating eyes comes from the good old Loomis method: to leave enough space between the eyes to fit in a third one. It's a general guideline that hasn't let me down yet, no matter the art style. Noses are very much an aesthetic choice. In some stylized approaches, they're nearly non-existent, but I love drawing noses, so I'm keeping the area around the nose tip and nostrils in this sketch, even if simplified. I'm simplifying the nose bridge and transition to the forehead even further, only shading in the side that is in actual shadow. Even when drawing stylized portraits, having light and shadows at the back of your mind can really help when it comes to picking which features to accentuate. Speaking of shadows, when drawing or painting more realistic portraits, the mouth would be all about the shadows cast on and by the lips and the structure surrounding them, while here I'm focusing more on lines. I like to emphasize the corners of the mouth and the very center, establishing the expression that way. Often I will also draw my mouths wider, not larger overall, but extending them to the side to allow for more expressiveness than a realistic one. I found if I just make features larger, it can look overly comical, which works amazingly in the movie's animation style, but maybe not so much in a colored pencil drawing. Eyes, nose and mouth are some very obvious elements to stylize, but I found there's one element that makes the biggest difference for me: the neck. Maybe you saw that I drew multiple lines, indecisive about what looks best for quite a while. And in the end, I went with the wider version. Making the neck look very small and thin completely changes the overall impression of a portrait, and I chose to go with a closer to realism version, though still on the smaller end. Realistically, it would connect closer to the edge of the jawline and ears. I'd mentioned the line work itself for stylization, and that hopefully becomes visible here for the hair especially. I'm going with blocky shapes and sharp lines to match the style of her eyes, but also to play off her patterns. This is what stylization comes down to, in my opinion, choosing the stylization to convey a message better. As I'm wrapping up the line drawing and before moving on to color, I wanted to take a moment to think about the full sketchbook spread. Usually my sketchbooks are more messy, full of scribbled thumbnails, but sometimes I do enjoy slowing down and celebrating the process like this, creating a full spread that is more or less cohesive. I think if you enjoy that kind of approach too, this sketchbook might be a great fit. I really haven't found any other sketchbook that lies as perfectly flat as this one and really invites drawing over 2 pages. That can lead to some interesting composition choices, and I'm starting here by choosing a color palette for the opposite page. A shade of similar saturation as the purple, but a smidge darker and deeper for a portrait of Chinu. Here the stylization will be different. I'm shading more and the proportions stay closer to realism. It's just the actual rendering style that's simplified. I think this is closer to what my sketches look like when I'm just a bit in a hurry and break elements of the face down into easy to draw components. I again combined movie scenes, character art and the voice actor for reference. It's an approach that I ended up enjoying a lot, even if the characters aren't modeled after their voice actors themselves. By the way, did you notice the headband element I added underneath the hat? Traditionally, gat were hats worn by nobles during the Joseon period. But in the movie, they are specifically a reference to pop culture depictions of Joseon Saja, the otherworldly messengers that guide souls to the afterlife. Back in the Joseon period, gat were worn over the traditional hairstyle of a top knot and a semi-transparent headband, the mangun. So while that's not part of the movie's design, I wanted to experiment with it here. The hair not being in a clean top knot is definitely not historically accurate at all, so I'm just having fun with different design elements. With 2 sketches ready to color, you'd think I would dive in, but I couldn't draw a sketchbook spread for this movie without the best creature since Toothless, the tiger, and his little magpie friend. I'd already started a gouache sketch of those two, but here my own cat napping next to me inspired a cat loaf pose. Again, looking at real-life reference can really help with stylization, breaking down poses or proportions to their simplest elements. It still took me a while to find an expression for this little guy's face though, without the signature wide open eyes especially. Here too, I stylized my line work with straight lines and sharp angles instead of the softer shapes. These sketchbooks by Arrtx are for mixed media and the description specifically mentions markers. So of course I wanted to give those a try here. This 180-gram paper held up really well to the erasing and layering of pencil and colored pencil in my late night drawing tests before, but how would it handle a heavier medium? Personally, I usually don't mind slight pleating, bending or warping in my sketchbooks because again, they get messy anyway. They are a space to experiment and learn, not for finished illustrations for me. But in case you're looking for a space for finished drawings, I do want to mention that the acrylic marker warped the paper enough on the back to be noticeable. If you plan on taking full advantage of this flat lay sketchbook spread designed to create illustration after illustration, that might very quickly become an issue. It flattened out a bit after the acrylic marker layer had dried, but this was just a tiny tiger sketch. I can imagine that a full page of marker art in multiple layers would make the other side of that paper difficult to use. I also own alcohol markers, so let's put this paper further to the test with those. Instead of painstakingly slowly shading in all of Rumi's portrait, I used a very light ochre shade marker to quickly go over everything. To be safe, I used the silicone sheet that came with these markers originally. While this single layer didn't completely soak through the paper, and I might have been fine without the silicone, it definitely bled. Again, this is a weak point if you want to continuously paint on double-page spreads. If you're fine with having some messier pages, pencil sketches on the back of a marker sketch, for example, then this level of bleed isn't much of an issue. It's quite a lot of bleeding for a single, light layer of alcohol marker though, and the paper also soaks up more marker ink than the typically very thin marker papers I've tried in the past. So I don't think I'd recommend using them much beyond an occasional color layer here or there. Those minor gripes aside, I absolutely love the feel of layering on this paper. It's wonderful for colored pencils with enough texture to let the pencils grip properly, and I could layer near endlessly, never noticing any peeling or scrubbing off the paper. If your main art materials for sketching are pencils or colored pencils, then this sketchbook gets my full recommendation for those. I'm using a lot of the shades that I used for Chinu's portrait line art here for shading Rumi's, just to make the overall spread more cohesive. Keeping in line with the stylized portrait, the colors themselves are also stylized. My shadows not as dark as I'd go to usually, and everything overall a bit flatter and simpler. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, I do live in South Korea for over a decade now. It was fun to see a movie with so many Korean mythology, art, and pop culture influences. I also live in a part of South Korea where shamanism, the local variety of Jeju Island, is still very common, and have even attended some good ceremonies in the past. I'd have loved to see more of those influences or past timelines. Though I also appreciate how they kept the tempo of the movie flowing instead of over-explaining everything. Before we watched it, the reason we, as in my husband and I, were a bit apprehensive was the K-pop setting. I'm glad that the movie focused on it as a musical inspiration, as a playing field for the heroines, making fun nods to variety shows and fan culture instead of the more toxic elements. Our heroines have full creative control, they are superheroes here after all. They get to write their own songs, their manager is a sweet, supportive assistant, they get to enjoy food and at least the semblance of a private life. Their struggle doesn't come from being in the entertainment business, but from being in the supernatural demon hunting business and their own insecurities, generational trauma, and high expectations. I liked the central message and how the girls' struggles are both universally relatable, but at their core still anchored in Korean culture. To not make simple into boring, I played around with chromatic aberration effects, meaning blending between color pencil shades of similar value and chroma, but very different colors. Pinks, blues, lavender, yellow, all of these find their place in the shadows of her face, while I'm keeping the brightly lit side mostly neutral and even. Shadows pick up colors reflected from the environment, so they're a great place to be playful and exaggerate, as long as we stay vaguely within shadow values. While I might occasionally take this sketchbook with me for travel sketches as it's protected by a sturdy hardcover, it's on the heavier side due to the sheer number of pages you get, so I think I'll reach for it more while at home for studies in pencil, colored pencil, and the occasional mixed media touches. The smaller version though is the perfect size for small portrait studies, and I especially like hardcover sketchbooks at that size as they are perfect for doodling with them on my lap or leaned against the table or when travel sketching. I'd been looking for a sketchbook to replace my very old portrait practice sketchbook, and this might fill in that gap. I especially loved going in with fluorescent pink, orange and yellow towards the end to really push the vibrancy. Towards the climax of the movie, there was a noticeable change in how Rumi's hair animation looked. It's not just flyaways, but it looks brittle, like glass splinters, and reflects light beautifully. I was in awe at that animation choice. And I'm curious if you noticed it too. Here I'm referencing that by drawing single hair strands with a very sharp violet pencil. Now for Chinu's portrait, I'm trying out yet another medium, and it's one that the sketchbook itself isn't specifically recommended for, beyond a light touch: watercolors. After seeing the alcohol markers bleed through the page, I wanted to see how the paper would handle a very simple watercolor layer instead. I didn't use much liquid and just toned my sketch, as I would have with markers. While the paper buckled slightly, it actually held up surprisingly well, and as there's no bleed for watercolor paint, this might actually be the better choice. The watercolor layer also fits with the overall softer, more muted look of Chinu's portrait. He's cagey, lies both to others and himself, and is riddled by regrets and self-doubt, so I went with this more shadowed portrait drawing with only one eye glowing demonically. I kept the lines and shading very sketchy, compared to the heavily layered and blended approach on Rumi. This is also part of stylization, the level of finish. No matter if you're painting and leaving rough brushwork, or expressive pencil strokes on drawings, or a sketch like this, where parts of the face just fade into unfinished, barely there pencil strokes. It creates a very different impression compared to a sleeker, more tightly rendered portrait. You can see some of the style choices from Rumi's portrait show up here too. The nose drawing mostly focusing on the nostrils, the eyes simplified but slightly enlarged, and the corners of the mouth emphasized with more pressure. I used a lot of the same shades as in Rumi's portrait to make sure the double spread would look harmonious, even if the base colors of each portrait are quite different. When I'd originally started to use these colored pencils, I thought I'd never reach for the fluorescent colors at all, but I've actually been using them quite a bit. They can really add a punch to skin tone shadows, and I like to combine them with otherwise very soft shading. Here they were doubly handy as I wanted to represent actual fluorescently glowing elements, but still, even with just regular portrait shading, I find them to be very useful. You might also notice that I'm reusing a lot of colors for different parts of the face. The pattern design color is also used to shade in eyes or lips, or even parts of the hat design. This is something I like to do to make a portrait, no matter if realistic or stylized, overall more harmonious. I try to contrast the simplicity of the portrait with a clear sense of form, leaving the white paper to shine through the watercolors and pencils to show where light hits his face, and the patterns wrapping around his cheek, chin and nose to emphasize space. And here too, I used very chromatic shadows, layering turquoise, red, purple, blue, orange, all together instead of going very dark. I love how the fluorescent orange color really makes the eye shine from the shadow. It's been a while since I sketched like this, and it made me miss the watercolor colored pencil combo. While the paper isn't the best for the watercolor or marker side of that combination, it really creates this delicate colored pencil texture that makes the shading look luminous. The paper being a bright white also helps with that, and I think that as long as I don't try to use markers and watercolors on every single spread, this will be a great successor to my previous drawing-focused sketchbook, which I'd finished a few months ago and not really found a perfect replacement for. If you enjoyed my ramblings about mixed media, stylization, the process behind these portraits, or would like to see more art inspired by Korean history or mythology in the future, I'm currently editing my travel sketches from visits to temples and historical sites and landscapes of South Korea, and hope I can post those sketchbook videos soon. Thank you so much for watching.